Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Innovation Showcase. The main purpose of this ongoing series is to inform viewers about exciting innovations and creative individuals across the fields of business, science, technology, education, and the arts. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Susan Israel. Susan is an architect, artist, and social entrepreneur. She's also the founder and now serves as the president of Climate Creatives, a Newton-based company that uses art and design to engage businesses, organizations, educational institutions, and communities on topics and issues related to climate change and sustainability. During the program, we're finding out why and how Climate Creatives came about and how it's grown, developed, and operates today. In the process, we'll come to better understand and appreciate the value and benefits of using public art as a means of making environmental issues accessible to the public and empowering and inspiring people to take action. Let's start by meeting Susan and then learning all about Climate Creatives. Welcome, Susan. So delighted to be able to be here.
Oh, Jay, it's my honor. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I think there are a few, if any, topics as important today as climate change and the environment. It's been fascinating to read about what you've accomplished, particularly the engaging methodology you employ. Before we hear much more about it, I think it would also be of interest if you'd start, please, by just sharing a little bit about your background, professional interest, and maybe some of your environmental concerns.
Sure. So I was an architect for over 20 years, and I started a green practice around 2008. And actually, I read Hot, Flat, and Crowded and An Inconvenient Truth, and I might be the only person who read a couple of books and changed my life. Probably not the only person, but and I responded immediately to that data, but I recognize that most people do not. And so when I started the green practice, it was at a difficult time economically, of course, 2008, 2011. I could not even sell an LED light bulb. But I was trying to think of ways to reach people in a more visceral way, and I'll talk about that. And so eventually, after a lot of experimentation, I left architecture completely and have been focused full-time on climate creatives since 2013, really since a little bit before that.
And could you share a little bit too about the inspiration, why and how Climate Creatives came about, please?
Sure. So as I was trying to do that green practice, I recognized that people they weren't motivated. They didn't understand climate change. They weren't motivated by it. They didn't think there was no feeling of urgency. And I thought that I could have a greater impact if I worked on culture change and behavior change and tried to reach people through alternative ways to data and scientists saying, the world is ending, and showing us dead polar bears. And really, people don't want to look at dying polar bears. So from my own personal experience of the world, I could see that people respond much better when they have some hope. They do not want to look at scary, ugly pictures and think about a terrible future. And so ironically, we've kind of moved from that initial period when people weren't thinking about it at all to all the way over to the other side when people are actually a little immobilized, but with fear at this point. And so even though my methodology was really apt at that moment, and the context has flipped 180 degrees, it's just as relevant today. So that wasn't something I was expecting. And I will say, on a more personal note, when my son was, I don't know, maybe 10, we were sitting around the dinner table and he looked at me and he said, "You guys wrecked the planet for all of us."
Mm.
Wow, I have to do something. My legacy cannot be that I knew about this and I didn't try. I may not succeed. I may not get to where, my goal of sort of very large goals of reaching a lot of people, but at least I'm trying. And so that will be my legacy.
I know you have some wonderful images to enhance our conversation. Would you please start sharing those?
Sure. Um, There we go. So this is actually kind of the end of the story, and we'll get to this slide again at the end. But this is a sculpture in Braintree, Massachusetts that shows future flood levels. But I'll talk about that more at the end.
Mm-hmm. And then I know continuing, we'll get a sense of the beginnings.
Right, exactly. So my first idea, I thought, well, okay, I need to reach people in a different way. I need to reach them viscerally and emotionally and get past the data so that, boom, you see it in a moment. There was a debate at that time about whether renewable energy was even viable. This is going all the way back to 2008. And I had this idea that I'm going to make these sculptures that go across the landscape, and there would be this dialogue about renewable energy, and it would be so cool. And it was 2008, and I couldn't even sell an LED light bulb. So there was also conversation about STEM and STEAM, the need to have more STEM and more innovation in schools, to bring girls into STEM, and at the same interdisciplinary studies. And at the same time, art was being cut from the budgets. And I said, wow, we really need to have art and science come together. The engineers and the artists need to learn from each other, and art can't really be seen as this sequestered, irrelevant skill. And so this is actually taking that idea of making these sculptures, and it became an educational methodology. This was from Newton South High School. Carol Ober at the Media Lab at Newton South High adopted what was called the Energy Necklace Project as an homage to the Olmsted's Emerald Necklace.
Mm-hmm.
And so she integrated, working with her, she integrated this idea of these energy sculptures and then wind sculptures into her curriculum. And this is actually one of my son's projects. He was one of her students, which is how I met her. And this is another one which incorporates wind as well. And so that became the beginning of the workshops. And at the same time, I couldn't get these large sculptures, but I was starting to do little public art outreach. And so this was again, renewable energy for the German embassy, myths versus facts. So I made these ensembles, and people went to festivals and farmers markets and events and talked to people about climate change. And we kind of ran the numbers of direct mail or just kind of general outreach, and this idea of walking around and talking to people in public, which seemed ludicrous. And I realized that my hit rate was at least as good, probably better. So that, and again, that personal connection was so important. And I learned one of my first lessons by doing, some experimental projects out there, which is go to where the people are. Don't try to attract them to you, but partner up with other people.
Most definitely. I think in talking to any successful inventor, that point that you just made keeps coming up again and again, how important it is to go to the audience you're trying to have an impact with. And in your case, important issue like climate change. In addition to yourself, who else has been involved with your efforts, and maybe a little bit about what they've brought to your work?
Sure. So bring an army. If you have an idea and it's a new idea and maybe a little bit of a complicated idea, my advice is to bring an army. So I have a fantastic board of advisors, but I have, 2 or 3 times more the number of friends who just have given me so much advice. This is just a few of my interns. I didn't start putting them on the website right away, so I've had an army of interns, and we work with partners. So we've partnered with over 150 different organizations or institutions. And as I said, go to where the people are. So that has really been able to amplify what we do and help us, move this along and expand it. And I will say, I put my kids right in the middle, because they weren't just psychological support. They actually gave substantive help to this project. So I grew up in a family business, and I have to say they kind of grew up in a family business too. If they had a skill and I could use it, the one at the bottom is now 30 years old. So this is the age he was when he was helping me.
Fabulous, fabulous. Since the start, how has the company grown and developed, some of the initial efforts?
Sure. So I went from that first, the first concept, and went to education. And then it got picked up at Harvard Business School as a leadership development exercise. And then that opened up this world of team building and workshops and working with all different kinds of organizations.
You know, as I mentioned in the introduction, what I really find fascinating about your work is the methodology, the different approaches, the integrated systems that you use, the philosophy behind your work. Would you share a little bit about that and maybe point out how it might differ from other approaches?
Sure. So this is the taking it from the classroom into other settings of these workshops. And some of the lessons that I learned and kind of and was intuitive about are people like to work with other people. They learn much better in a setting. So I always put people together in small teams. When you work with your hands, you learn it so much better than if you're looking at it on a screen or you're hearing it. I have a little bit of an auditory issue where I don't remember anything I hear. And so that locks it in. And then that visual artistic design process, when you're designing solutions instead of learning and hearing about other solutions, again, you learn the ideas and the concepts because you're going to forget about all of the details when you hear about what somebody else did. So I put people together in small groups, and then they have to build a solution, design a solution to there's a prompt, XYZ for each group, and they have to show it in built form, even if it's not actually a built form solution. And so this is one of the workshops.
You know, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you work with a range of audiences, businesses, communities, education. Would you give us a little overview of some of the different programs and the audiences you're in touch with?
Sure, I'd love to. Thanks. So taking this one step further, this workshop, so this is with universities. I do workshops and lectures and classes with universities. This is with Emerson College, where they had to design, it was about sustainable development goals, and they had to design a device, something that would help explain the SDGs to their peers on campus and then deploy it. And then, of course, COVID hit. But they said it was the most impactful exercise they've done, the first time they understood how to actually implement the SDGs. So as I said, COVID, just as I was getting a lot of wind under my sails and I had a lot of great things lined up, COVID hit. So my whole mantra had been hands-on, face-to-face. You got to get face-to-face. And so I created an online version called Quarantine Quilts. And if you click on one of the left is just the homepage. If you click on one of these squares, it will pop up to one of these quilts on the right. It's a digital quilt made in a team in Zoom in breakout rooms. And so it took the whole hands-on process and turned it into a virtual process. At the same time, sort of going back to the beginning to 2013, I was doing public art. And so this was the beginning of Rising Waters. It was Rising Tides. I'd been invited to a group show. I went to the site in East Boston and I said, gee, I wonder where sea level rise will be. And so I just showed 6 feet of sea level rise incrementally on this pier. And then that was Rising Tides, that launched Rising Waters, which was a way, again, of reaching out to the public in addition to workshops. At the same time, I wanted to have some kind of interactive piece to it. So a companion piece was Message in a Bottle. In the background on the left, you can see the pier off in the distance. And I put these little bottles around the site, which had prompt words. 6 of them were scary words, like denial, and 6 of them were optimistic words, like hope, renew, rebuild. And I asked people to put their response to climate change and sea level rise in the bottle, which they did. And then we put it on our website. And so that launched another project, but it also started this interactive version. And then we went on to do a bunch of different tea stations. And, as we talk about this, I'll show you more of Rising Waters, but this was Maverick. So it was a storm preparedness event.
And just picking up on that, what's been some of the reaction and feedback from participants and others?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. There's a little insert here, and I don't know if people can see it under their Zoom window, but people really responded to this. The reason why we ended up doing Maverick was because somebody in the neighborhood saw rising waters, rising tides in East Boston, said, oh, hey, we're doing this event. Can you come do this at the community center and the T station? And so this woman was on the way home from work with her groceries, and she said, this is so great. Will you take my picture with it? And pretty much everybody who walked past that initial installation and then in other places said, wow, you should do this everywhere. I literally heard that, wow, you should do this everywhere. And then this is another version of Rising Waters where people have put their do one thing climate commitments on. These are fish flags, and it's the same idea, but it shows different flood levels. These are at different heights, a little hard to tell from the picture.
Mm.
And these families were walking through the park after, and they were reading the flags, and they were reading all the things that people said that you could do and showing their kids. And I thought, wow, that is my proof of concept right there. That's the reaction that I want people to have. And so this is just the workshop where people make these flags, and there's sort of a conversation, and they talk about what they want to do. This was a Spanish speaking group.
Wonderful. It's been an extremely successful effort, Rising Waters. Maybe we'll even hear some more about it. Could you continue with some of the other growth and development of climate creatives?
Sure. And yeah, just in case I forget to mention later, we have eventually now reached over 650,000 people on site.
Wow.
And yeah, working in 4 countries and with, as I said, 150 partners. So I was lucky enough to go to a conference where in 2016, we were camping in Panama in the highlands, and somebody told me about these islands, the San Blas Islands, which are called, the tribe is Gunayala is the archipelago, and they're going to be underwater. We've heard about a lot of South Pacific islands, but these are in the Caribbean. And so I went there in 2017, and I did this installation with the community there. Some of my helpers were 4 years old, and I did a workshop with some of the students there as well to have a reaction to sort of it was a very soft exposure to it, because they spoke Guna, I spoke English. A few people spoke Spanish in between, but I didn't. And so everything here was pretty much done without real language. So that was in Panama. Then I went to Hong Kong, and I worked with students in 3 schools there. First, I worked online, and then I went in person. These students on the left, 2 phenomenal students who have gone on to do climate work as adults. And they installed it to educate their school, and they started to use this new format of the 3 lines. On the right was a response and planning workshop by middle schoolers in Hong Kong for them to do their own installation. Again, COVID got in the way. Hong Kong had some political complications that derailed things there as well. And then ultimately, we ended up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, at the Museum of Discovery and Science, working with the city, with Broward County and their STEM department and their climate department. And at a student summit for 800 students, we did this, which is now the prototypical Rising Waters installation. We did this installation, showed them how to do it, showed them the fish flags. They did an installation then, and then they ordered kits. COVID hit, and eventually they did it in 16 schools and came back and painted this on permanently at the museum. So that's become our model for scaling. And we are now, with all of our projects, we always work in a way to make some kind of participatory installation piece, but also a way to scale it through kits. We have university chapters starting this spring. They're starting through the Students of UN. We have 5 schools committed so far.
Fabulous, fabulous. What are some of your other current and upcoming projects and plans?
Sure. So current, this is back to Rising Waters. So this is in Braintree, Massachusetts, and it's a green infrastructure outreach project. So the city elevated the walkway along playing fields on a tidal river to protect it from flooding. But when the high tide gets to the top level of this sculpture, the berm will be removed and the playing fields will become wetlands. And the reason why they did this was to explain to people, we have to stop protecting things that are not protectable. So some people have heard the term managed retreat, a very soft approach to managed retreat. Nobody says that, because if you say that in the public, people just kind of jump out of their seats. So this sculpture is there forever. It is screwed into the ground, literally. And so when it gets to this point at 2070, high tide, and at the height of the berm, this is the height of the berm, the berm will be removed. However, this was in January of this year at low tide on a Saturday. On a Sunday, this was high tide the next day.
Oh.
It was a king tide, so it was an extreme tide, and it was plus 12 inches. But the bottom of the sculpture says 2030. And so you can just project that I doubt we're going to get to 2070 before we're there. So we'd like to build more of these sculptures, and it's kicked off a series of what we're calling climate sensors. So we're looking at air quality, extreme heat, drought, flooding, and then we're going to add biodiversity at some point. But to have very elegant housings that have meters in them, that so that we can see the data and they can communicate the data, but also give us some kind of visceral connection to that data, and have a series of those. But that's sort of a longer term. We're doing everything I talked about, but we're really looking at this sort of long-term permanent installations as the direction we want to head.
No, I mean, this image just underscores what you've been saying from the beginning throughout, how important it is to see some type of visual representation of what's really going on. You can read all the data as you've mentioned, but this just strikes home so strongly.
Yeah. And actually at a public meeting after this, somebody said, why are we talking about rebuilding parts of this field? It's all going to be gone anyways. And my client was overjoyed, because you can imagine she got a lot of pushback for putting in a piece of public art as part of a green infrastructure.
And 4 or 5 minutes or so that we have left, like to hear a little bit about resources, please.
Sure. That is always, resources are really a tough thing. When I started this, it was such a new concept. People were not talking about climate art. They weren't talking about interdisciplinary. They were talking about the need for interdisciplinary things, but not understanding what that truly meant. And scientists were so bent on telling everybody the sky is falling that it was really hard to explain why what I was doing was impactful and necessary. Now there's been a sea change. Everybody says, I've gone from people saying climate and art, I don't really get the connection. And now it's like, oh, yeah, we want some of that. We want that. We have that on our program. And but nonetheless, it's still extremely hard to fund, because science organizations say we don't fund art, and arts organizations say we don't fund science. So I've been banging my head against this, but the world is catching up, and so I'm really looking more towards science institutions to be funding some of this and some of these larger projects where there are sensors and there is data being collected in it. So I'm looking for funding for these big projects. I'm always looking for partners. I'll be going to the American Geophysical Union to speak they have a conference with 30,000 scientists. It's the largest science conference in the world. So I'm going to be going there.
On your website, you also list some wonderful resources for others to get involved in the topic. Could you briefly share some of the opportunities that you've laid out there?
Sure. So we are always looking for partners to do installations. We do have a lot of resources just for people to sort of self-serve, educate themselves, and things that they can do, action items. There are so many, I'd sort of hate to run down them here. But we are always looking for partners who are looking to either engage their constituents or help advance this communication of science and outreach. We're looking for municipalities who need our kind of outreach, or organizations or corporations, corporate sponsors who have a commitment to ESG, and they really want to show that they're supporting their communities by helping them prepare for climate change. This is an installation from the World Trade Organization. So, we love to find partners at places like this, at conferences, and connect them and help them get their messaging out. One of the things that I talked to them about at WTO was, how do we help the world see the good work that you're doing on climate and sustainability? Because people don't realize you're working on that. So I'm always looking for introductions to people who might be interested in what we're doing.
And Susan, when you look back more than 15 years now since you've been involved in this endeavor, what are some of your thoughts about the journey where you are now and where you're going to be going?
Oh, it's funny. I'm really excited. I would be lying if I said I didn't have some really low moments when I thought, why am I doing this? But then I think, but what else am I going to do? There's nothing else that means as much to me as this. And I have an incredible sister and brother who also should have been on my partner's page, because they've been there lockstep with me, and they've just said, just keep going. Just keep going. They do give me more substantive advice than that too, but and so I'm super excited about these climate sensors. I'm talking to an organization in Japan about coming out and doing some large scale installations with them with their beach cleanups, and I'm talking to a university in South Africa about doing a multifaceted outreach project that can for the university and for the community. So there are these larger opportunities where all the facets of what we do can be brought to bear. And I'm excited. I think we're really poised for some incredible growth. And it's taken a lot of trial and error to get to this point. It's taken a lot of failure to get to this point, a lot of pivoting. But I feel like we were early. And now I can't give up, because we are really at the moment, though I think that we're poised to be moving to be where we want to be. It'll take a while. I know these are all 3-year projects. Nothing's fast.
You were definitely ahead of your time, but I think many of us are trying to catch up, and we appreciate you and others leading the way like you've been doing. In closing, how can viewers and others keep informed about your work and possibly contact you?
Sure. I love when people contact me. So I haven't put my phone number on it because it is TV, but here's my email, susan@climatecreatives.com. And you can also go to the websites, climatecreatives.com, and risingwaters.org, and quarantinequilts.org. But please email me, and we'll have a conversation and figure out. You may not even know how you could get involved. I do have people say to me, how do I get involved with the organization? And so we'll just have a conversation and figure out what would work for you.
Well, Susan, in closing, I have to say it was wonderful to have this conversation. Thank you so much for informing us about all your endeavors, continued success, and definitely look forward to staying in touch.
Great. Thanks very much. And we have a newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter. Okay. Thank you, Jay. This was really such a pleasure and such an honor. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Also want to thank those of you watching for tuning in, and hope you'll be able to watch next time.